If I could get everybody's attention. All right, we're going to get started. So I'd like everybody to get in their seats. Thank you very much. It's great to see everybody here tonight. I'm Councilman Roberto Treviño. I want to welcome you here tonight to this presentation. The interpretive team will be presenting the site plan and strategies for the Alamo, reflective of the vision and guiding principles that the Citizens Advisory Committee created. This is the first draft, and we want your feedback. After the presentation, Maurice McDermott will facilitate the discussion. I want to thank her for this, for hosting us tonight. Thank you so much, Maurice. We will go around the room and ask each of the committee members to give us their feedback. The design team will take the feedback as they work on the second draft plan, which will be presented to the committee on July 10th. We'll return again on July 25th and have meetings scheduled for August 7th and the 21st. The plan will not proceed to City Council until the committee is comfortable with the plan. The committee meetings will be open to the public, and we invite the public to listen as the committee deliberates and provides feedback. There's also a series of public hearings that will be held the week of June 18th throughout the city. There is a handout with the times and locations at the sign-in table. We'll have another round public hearings and meetings set for the week of July 16th. We are listening. Even though we do not have a public opportunity for tonight, we have comment cards for those in the audience. Additionally, the presentations will be posted online. I hope you see that we have taken the feedback and we heard through the master plan phase that we have been thoughtful in the proposed site plan. I would like to introduce John Kosman with PJV, who will kick off the presentation and then pass it on to Natasha Watterson with Cultural Innovations, and finally Eric Kramer with Reed Hildebrand. John, thank you guys.
How's everybody doing? Good. We have a whole bunch of stuff to share with you. A lot of slides, a lot of content to go through. As Roberto said, we're going to divide up some of the presentation across the three of us. So I'll start with a little bit of an intro, and Natasha will take it from there. Eric will take it from there. So a couple of comments we wanted to get through. Maybe some introductory comments first before we put all kinds of great stuff up there on the screen. Like Roberto said, our team has been listening, right, and hearing for a long time, right? Tonight's kind of a great culmination of, specifically for this week, right? The past 3 days, we've had over 20 meetings with individual groups over the past 3 days. This is a great way to kind of culminate our session, our time here, to review all that with you, get all that feedback. Today also happens to be, this is the 5th time we've gotten together with you as a group, right, with the Citizens Advisory Committee, so we're pretty excited about that as well. Excited to share our progress, hear your feedback one more time. We are also excited for this kind of opportunity because we understand you're not only a committee that's been chosen, but you're also a great representation. You know, you're a small little microcosm of the public, of the citizens of the city of San Antonio. So we take that as an important step. We also recognize through all of our conversations with you up to this point, not only the passion for the vision and guiding principles, but we've heard a lot of other individual passion points, and we recognize that. And so today you're gonna hear response from all those, right? You think about, we fully understand passion for the reverence and respect, right, for the mission footprint, the telling of a comprehensive story, right, full spectrum of time and from all perspectives. We're going to touch on that today. Full accessibility to the site, parade routes, cenotaph, all those things, you're going to see us address those today. So that's pretty exciting. So we'll touch on all that. Many of these issues you'll see are related to each other, right? So you're going to see some concepts and some proposed concepts that take those into account and how they knit together. We also realize that a lot of those, there may be opposing views, right? So sometimes with those opposing views, we have to look at multiple different options We have to look at some understanding of how they oppose each other and come up with their compromises or adjustments related to that. So we're looking forward to that conversation as well. One thing that we can agree on, right, the reason that we're all here, right, we're all here for all these meetings, all this time, as well as all the people here to understand, is the importance of the project. So it doesn't go unsaid, right? We're here because the Alamo deserves preservation and an experience worthy of one of the greatest historical sites in the country, and that's why we're here to talk about this, right? Also, the citizens and the residents of San Antonio deserve an area of their city that also is worthy of that type of respect. So, with all that, today's kind of, like Roberto says, kind of a status check. Right? As a point in time, we're sharing our progress with you. You're going to see some proposed solutions. You're also going to see some parts of our presentation go through multiple options. And so when you see those multiple options, you'll know that we're still considering them, right? That's part of the process. That's part of the design process. So after tonight, we're going to all get back to hard work, right? We're going to take all your feedback and, like Roberto said, come back with multiple rounds and adjust based on your feedback and conversations. So with all that, let's dig in a little bit. We have a couple introductory slides. A lot of the time we start these meetings because the interpretive plan, it's kind of a term that needs a little bit of a description. So we wanted to make sure that we put down what our charge is as a team, right? So all of us that are here and all the folks that are back in our offices that are working on this great project, we talk about a lot. What's our goal? So our goal is a comprehensive analysis and a strategic design, but it's for an improved public experience, right? And to us, that means, the physical approaches and site design, but it also has to do with the immersive experiences and how those educational experiences can kind of be dealt with the site design at the same time. And really what we're after is that emotional connection. So you'll see that throughout the day. A lot of our site design that we're going to show is based in content or based on an emotional connection. Secondly, we always like to remind ourselves kind of where we are in the process, right? We always think about as an interpretive plan. We use the word design a lot. This is a reminder we're not in design yet, right? We're still in the planning mode. You see that screen up there? It says there's planning, then there's design, then there's implementation. There's so much great design phases that are yet to come after we finish this planning phase. But that means that little dashed line up there that talks about today, so that we're right kind of at the 3/4 mark of our interpretive plan or so. All the work that's preceded us, the vision guiding principles, the master plan as a foundation for our work, continued research and archaeology. So all that comes into play as we're doing our interpretive plan. But it's a good reminder what you see here today. It's strategies. It's not design. We're not going to be talking about materials. All right, what's that exact? What do you see that rendering? What's that material on the ground? That's not the important part, right? The important part is the understanding of the strategy of what the vision is. With that, today we're kind of dividing up into 3 chapters. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the vision and the principles first. Natasha's going to come up. She's going to touch kind of as a really brief summary of some of the interpretive content. So you remember last time we met, there was a much longer presentation, right? 50-some slides that all dove deep into the understanding of the content and a strategy of all the stories to share and how we're going to share them, within the museum and the outdoor experiences. So we'll give you a little summary of that before we dive deep. A good part of this presentation really is site planning strategies. So that's where we'll go at the end before we get to discussion and questions. Now, that is a real summary of what those goals are, right? Our goals, we want to explain how our site planning process is really relative to content and public experience. We want to show how our site and the context is going to achieve the vision and guiding principles. That's foremost. And most importantly, we're going to hear some feedback. Okay? All right, with that, we're not going to read through every one of the vision guiding principles, but we start everything to keep these in mind. It is important to us. It's been part of our backbone and foundation of the project. We are going to see this slide every so often. Right? We use these guiding principles, and you'll see that we use them in different ways. These have helped us to come up with succinct ways to think about our goals as a team. Right? So sometimes we use these guiding principles, and some are very related to content or management. Other ones are related to site-driven experiences. So you'll see this come back again, but we wanted to share our process a little bit and show how these guiding principles start to form the way we think about the site strategies. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Natasha. I'll come back up when we get to questions. All right?
So as John said, some of these guiding principles really speak to how we think about content. And we can summarize them for us with this statement, which is that one of our aims is that we want to change the understanding of the Alamo as a building to the Alamo as a much bigger place. And we think there are 4 big things that we can do to help achieve that. So the first is to create a 21st century museum and heritage site complex with both indoor galleries and, as it were, like an open-air museum, and that we consider both of those places as places for interpretive storytelling, but with each playing to its unique strengths and character. So a museum can do things brilliantly that a heritage site can't, and vice versa. So inside the museum galleries, we use the collections, so the Alamo collection and the Phil Collins collection, to reveal that deeper story, all the way from the 16th century to today, and in its regional and worldwide context. Whereas outdoor, on the heritage site, we can use interpretation and programming to tell the stories in the very spot where they happened and really help make people feel that they are standing in the footsteps of people from the past. So to go into a little more detail about what we're thinking for the museum, and I know that for some people this is a bit of a recap, but we are proposing 4 galleries and 1 pervasive feel throughout the museum. The top line of this diagram shows 3 galleries that we think are chronological and that explore the story of the Alamo from when it was a mission through the Battle of the Alamo and the Texas Revolution, and then take the story from that point when it was a ruin all the way up to the icon that it is today. Then we explore a thematic topic that we have, for the moment, called Legends of the Alamo, and that really explores how this story has become bigger in popular culture than in many ways it was at the time, and explores these stories that people know and love. And as I've said, a pervasive feel throughout the museum of the Alamo being a special place through time. To show you a little bit about how the collection supports these 4 galleries, I'm just going to show you some highlight images of items from both of those collections that I've mentioned that illustrate this. So this is some of the things that support that Mission de Valero gallery, and this includes some items from the Phil Collins collection too, which actually spans all 4 of those galleries. We move on to the Texas Revolution gallery. It's both documents, archives, and 3D objects. When we move into the Ruins Icon Gallery, again, it's documents and objects, but it's also paintings and actually also heritage photography, early archive photography. And then when we look at the Legends Gallery, the Alamo collection has a really lovely collection of narrative art that explores some of those stories. There are props from some of the movies, but there's also early pamphlets that start to show how those stories proliferate, almost from the battle itself onwards. Then as we move out onto the site, what this diagram is showing is how that we can pull that storytelling all around the site, so not just the church and the long barrack, but up to the north wall, what was the main gate in the southwest corner. We can explore the stories of this place through all of those locations. And we can explore it through all of those periods of time and really layer history up and tell a wide story. And that we can also actually bring that right up to date by exploring the archaeological research, both that has happened in the past, but that also will happen as this project develops, and really reveal that historical evidence in place. And with that, I'll hand over to Eric.
As a landscape architect and part of the team, our moment of collaboration is the realization of all of the storytelling and teaching that Natasha and John talked about in the physical conditions of this site. We also, of course, begin with the guiding principles, and there are a number of those that are really focused on the experience of this place. And we've translated that into a different statement. It's obviously related to the one Natasha put in front of you. Our measure of success, our way of translating those principles, is to say that at the end of the day, if everyone who comes to this site, whether they're a citizen of San Antonio who's been here 100 times,
or someone from out of town or out of the country who's never been here before, that when they arrive, they understand that this is a place of reverence and learning. And this is important to say because that is a feeling. That is something that is transmitted through the qualities of a place. It's not just about a set of signs. It's not just about a set of exhibits. It's about how a place communicates that to you. And as landscape architects, that's what we do. We communicate cultural ideas through placemaking. So I'm going to talk about the ways in which we get here. We're going to talk about this really at 3 levels. First, we're going to talk about it strategically. What are the big steps, the big ideas that we think help us realize this vision? Then we're going to talk about, and we're going to show you some images. What might it feel like to arrive at the Alamo? And this is, as John said, not design, but it's about the quality of the space, because that really is what we're focused on right now. And then we're going to step back into some of the hard decisions and the big changes that are required to make this site work. And so you're going to see this in a kind of a layered presentation. So to achieve that feeling of reverence and learning, we think there are 5 key steps. First is to clarify the periods of historical significance. So this is important. When people arrive here, they ought to understand that there are different pieces and they have different provenance and they come from different times and they tell different stories. And they're not all one thing. And actually, we believe that the way in which we organize your experience on the site should communicate that. We think to tell the bigger story, to express the Alamo as a place and not a building, as Natasha described, revealing and delineating as much of that mission footprint as possible is really critical. We think water, it's really part of the history of the city. It's critical to the life of the mission. And of course, the quality of water, its sound, its movement, it's a real asset that could be brought to the site. And of course, it's not just the site itself, it's how you get there, how you approach it. You ought to be learning the whole way. You ought to be being brought to this feeling of reverence and learning as you approach. And of course, it should be accessible, and this means universally accessible for everyone to use and understand. And it should be intellectually and experientially accessible. In other words, not hidden in part of the city, but deeply connected to the city. And so when you arrive from any corner, you know you've arrived at the Alamo. So there are some steps that it might take to get there. And this is a diagram that we're going to show you quite a bit tonight. So if everybody can sort of orient themselves, the cenotaph is here, the Long Barrack, the church, the Hyatt, the Crockett, the Menger. The things that we hold really as the centerpiece of this of what it takes to achieve these experiences begin with really preserving and emphasizing the critical artifacts of the Long Barracks and the church. And this means stabilizing and preserving them. This is work that you won't necessarily see, but is critical to the process. But it also means giving them space to be seen and understood. This idea of expressing and revealing as much of the footprint as possible, well, most of you know that a lot of that is under the street, or it's in the sidewalk, or it's in the planters in the middle of the plaza, or it's under the buildings that surround the site. And so this raises really important and challenging questions about the difference and how we manage both continuity with our history and change, which allows some of that history to be told. And so we're going to take a leap here and ask a question. What happens if we start to pull away some of those layers of the 21st century city? The curbs, the street lights, the traffic lights, the cars, and we begin to understand that footprint as something that is a space that occupies a larger component of the city. And then it's interesting in this idea of clarifying periods of historic significance, we see the mission footprint, and we understand that that is a footprint that evolved over time into the 18th and early 19th century. And then the cenotaph is there. And we ask ourselves a question because the cenotaph, of course, is a 20th century component of the site. We wonder what would happen if that moved just outside of the historic footprint into... So I'm asking you to go on a journey here and understand this as a process and to understand what is possible, because we see an incredible opportunity to take the cenotaph and put it in a place of honor and a place of significance. We also see within this the opportunity to reveal and express the acequia as they move through the site. So all of this also raises the question about the buildings along the western edge. And no, we are not proposing necessarily that they all come down. But I'm going to ask a question here about what it would be like if they did. And then we're going to dig deeper and further in this presentation about the options, because it's not a single choice, it's a complicated choice. There are layers of history that are told in those buildings as well, right? We're not about stopping the history in 1836. But if those buildings step away, again, you begin to see that footprint in a different context. And you begin to understand that it is something that is related to the larger city as a whole. And we think that really enhances the opportunity for wayfinding and clarity. So at the end of the day, if all of these operations are undertaken, we see the opportunity to have a really clear mission footprint, a very identifiable garden, and a pervasive and really animated public Plaza de Valero that isn't just a small space, but is a space that reaches out around those sites to the north and to the east and to the west, and a place for a world-class museum that does what Natasha talked about, it having the opportunity to do. And this leads us to the second really big measure of success. A lot of what I just talked about is really about revealing and telling the history and the story of this place. But it's also part of your city. We recognize that. It has to function on a day-to-day basis. And honestly, it should function better than it does today. It should be the place people want to go and spend time. It should be a world-class, pedestrian-friendly, and comfortable civic space. So it's going to take some work to get there as well. And we think we should reduce the amount of vehicular traffic through that site so that pedestrians feel comfortable, they can look around, they can read the site and understand it without being worried about the car, having a place of reflection. We think those connections to the Riverwalk and the other community and cultural assets that are so incredible in this city, and we've been so really lucky and privileged to become knowledgeable and experience them ourselves as visitors. Everyone should be drawn and directed to those. We think it has to have generous spaces for gathering and public expression, and on days like today, it needs shade. It needs to be a place people want to stay because it's cooler than many other places in the city. So how do you do that? Well, we think we hold the vehicular access at the edges. We push them to the side so that we have a large pedestrian space. That means blocking traffic to the north and south along Alamo. And we are also considering Houston Street between La Jolla and Bonham as an opportunity to have that sense of the plaza wrap entirely around the footprint. And actually an opportunity to reveal the very north wall of the Mission, which is in between the Gibbs Hotel and the Federal Building, which now doesn't feel like part of the Mission at all. Again, we'll talk more in detail about this, but this whole site should have fingers. It should reach out. It should direct you to and draw you from these other cultural and historical sites. It's really interesting to understand the scale of this space because right now the plaza that we know is really just about 2 acres. But this revealed footprint of the Mission could be up to 3 acres in size. The garden is 3 acres, and this expanded plaza is 3.5 acres. If you look at Main Plaza, that's 3 acres. The really active but small, less than an acre site at the Pearl. Thinking about these 3 components of the site functioning together to create a kind of a really rich cultural center is an amazing opportunity for this city. And then we don't need to tell you about shade because you know what it's like to walk on the Riverwalk and why so many people spend so much time down there. It's probably partly the restaurants, but it's really partly the shade. It's the quality of being in that space and having a temperature drop we can bring that to this plaza as well. So here's an image of what that plaza and that space could look like. And we want to not stay up here, we want to get down on the ground. But this ought to start to explain to you that the plaza, the footprint, and the garden have three different but interlocking characters. So here again, go on a journey with us, and we're going to have to explain where we are because some of these may not be familiar. Imagine you're walking to the north from Commerce Street. To your right, just out of the picture, is the River Center. To the left is the block of buildings and shops. Imagine those shops in this promenade, this pedestrian space, having outdoor cafes. And as you arrive and come to the north, you are greeted by the cenotaph in a place of honor here, really a kind of a marker of the invitation and introduction to the historic site. Stepping a little further to the north, you come out into that larger open plaza, again shaded by trees, and you see the cenotaph in its relation to the church facade. You always see this in its relation to its larger historical context. There are places for seating and gathering there. We think this is an active site at night as well, and this is a view you can't have today. Imagine you're standing at the doors to the Hyatt from on La Soya Street, looking through where the Paseo is now at the grade level, so the street comes through. You would have views to the church facade, the museum building proposed on the left of the image. This is a totally transformed experience for people as they move through this city and understand this not as hidden, but as linked to its surroundings. Imagine Houston Street. You see the Gibbs Hotel on the left, and the proposed museum building on the right. Imagine a pedestrianized space there where you're drawn right into the Mission footprint and you see the garden right there behind the Long Barracks. Houston Street on the other side, here the Emily Morgan on the right and the garden on the left. Again, a pedestrianized space, the scale of that street narrowed down, the big stone wall, the masonry wall around the garden, which is not original to the Mission and many people confuse as being part of the Mission. What if that came down and the garden came straight all the way to the street and there were gates there? Think about how transformative that would be for the feeling of walking along Houston Street. And then being within that Mission footprint and not worrying about the cars zipping by, there's a different kind of intimacy that is able to happen between you and the buildings and the historic artifacts. It's still a place for wedding photos and prom photos and to go in the evening and have your photo taken in front of the chapel. That doesn't change here. This is still the critical and active center of this city. So those are what we think might be possible in terms of the quality and the character of the space, of the Mission and the area around it. And it takes some work to get there. There are some changes that we think need to be made to realize this vision that you have given us in your guiding principles. So we're going to talk about that in some detail. I'm going to start with the Mission footprint area, and then I'll talk about the Plaza de Valero. Starting in the Mission footprint to the north, we think there are 4 primary steps that we should take to create this place of reverence and learning. And one is to lower the ground plane. And I'll talk more about this, but and I'll really get into detail, but it's not a deep drop. It's about changing it just enough to differentiate it from the surface of the city and make it a place that feels special and different. It is to inscribe the footprint on the ground so that you really it's not just about understanding where it is, it's about seeing its scale and complexity. We also think that this isn't really just about two-dimensional things. It's not just about the lines on the ground. It's important to understand that this was a space that was bounded, but we don't want to build walls. We don't want to block people off and block people's views. And so we actually think that trees, a grove of trees around the edge, can create a sense of interiority and scale. And it can also push back some of the very large buildings that are at the edge that distract from the experience of the space. And finally, all of this is really geared towards one thing, which is telling the stories that Natasha talked about and telling them where they happened. So here, let's talk about this idea of lowering the ground plane. It's not just within the footprint, it's in an area around it, and that allows us to see it. What you see here is a drop of about 16 or 18 inches. This avoids going down into the area of archaeology and creating any disturbance to the artifacts that may be there. Think of it as sort of peeling off the pavement of the 21st century city. Along the edges, there aren't walls, there are seats and steps and ramps so that people in wheelchairs and with their baby carriages can still get down into that site. We show here a kind of an idea that that footprint could be revealed through a translucent surface. This isn't a new idea, of course, but we think that's an opportunity to interpret the surface through marking and information, and where there's actual artifacts and archaeology to allow that to be seen. This idea of dropping the grade also helps in the preservation of the historic buildings, which we know have had this fill around them, is detrimental to their long term. This is a view of being within the footprint. Looking to the south, you see the Menger and you see the proposed cenotaph location there. Imagine a shady place all the way around this site where people can sit and contemplate what they're experiencing. You also see here that that grove of trees creates shade, so people might really want to spend time here. It's important that while we lower that ground plane to create differentiation, that we also maintain connection. And that's why we show those broad stairs. Here on Houston Street, the image you already saw, we see the opportunity that might be not steps, but a big, broad, sloping plane, a ramp that would allow people to just kind of come and walk right off of the pedestrianized Houston Street into that Mission compound. Now here we want to talk about this idea of revealing the footprint. And this is one of those areas that John talked about where there's a lot of complexity, a lot of nuance, and there are still a lot of choices. We showed you what it's like to think about making adjustments to the site to start to peel back and see more of the footprint. And we think there are a couple of strategies because removing those buildings is a big choice. They have history. Certainly the Woolworths building, we are very conscious of the history of desegregation and civil rights and the desegregation of the lunch counter. We recognize that that is a story that has to continue to be told here. It cannot be erased and removed if these buildings change. And so part of our process is to figure out how to continue to tell all of these stories. But there's also a value in revealing that footprint and understanding the wholeness of the mission. And so these are things we're still discussing. Part of this process is going to engage a consultant to assess the significance and integrity of those buildings. So from an evidence-based approach, we can make smart choices. And I'm going to walk you through 4 ideas that we've had about how we might approach this. One extreme retains the full block. The other extreme retains the Crockett building, but removes the others. So zooming in, we can see that this is retaining the full block of those buildings. So they sit on the edge of the site. The gray area is really museum building behind. So imagine being within the footprint, and along the edge, you see the full range of those 3 buildings, and you are able to interpret those layers of history. You will notice here that you are not able to see the full footprint because it is under those buildings, but you are able to see the acequia because it is in front of them. Another idea would be to leave the facades so that you are able to understand those buildings in terms of their scale and their presence, but to remove behind them and create an opportunity to create an amazing museum building. As most of us know, the interior of those buildings were gutted long ago and are now part of the amusement and attractions. And so the physical fabric inside those buildings is not the same. One interesting opportunity when we do this is that, sorry, that's the complicated clicker. Oop, here we go. There's the opportunity to have a pedestrian walkway at the grade of the street that is continuous and allows pedestrians to walk north to south, basically behind that facade and looking into the mission footprint. So imagine you're a person just walking through the city and you're trying to get from the south side to the north side quickly, and you don't want to go down into the mission where you've got a lot of active interpretation and school groups. This is a sort of a beeline through that is possible. Here, within the footprint, you would see those buildings, but you would actually see through them to see the people walking north-south along the length. Another option is to not retain the facades because it's actually not the full building, but like we would do in some of the other places, to interpret them through a kind of a framework. Now, this isn't a design, this is something that would be developed over time, but this is something that's been done around the world where there are buildings that people are trying to express the scale and significance of, but without retaining the buildings themselves. The final option, and the most significant one, would be to take down the Palace and the Woolworths building, but to leave the Crockett building facade. It's interesting here, you still get that connection north to south, and in this scheme and in the others, actually that Crockett building really serves an interesting purpose, getting people from the museum at the upper level and down into the site without disrupting the public traffic north and south along that promenade. And here's what that could look like. And again, this building is not a design. This is just a sort of a gray box to understand that this would be a place where the building could be. But imagine what the views from that promenade would be, always looking into the Long Barrack and the church. It's pretty compelling. And then being in the space itself, here we begin to show the kind of living history, active interpretation that we see taking place there. And we see the quality of shade that is created by having those trees around the edges. And it's really important that this is a shady place because no one's going to want to spend time going to those sort of outdoor classroom events if it isn't a place where it's able to be cooled and comfortable. We are working really closely to think about where there are opportunities to do active interpretation and to sort of mark the important historical moments. This is a drawing that is certainly not complete. If we had put everything on here, you wouldn't have any picture left. It would be covered with information. So we're just calling out a few so that you understand sort of how our process is working. But it's important to note here that you'll see identifiers from every period, from Native American burial grounds to the mission period, to the textile workshop and the acequia, and even also, of course, to the battle moments, to the southwest corner, to the main gate and the lunette, and to the location of Mexican soldiers, as telling the full picture of this history. We think there are some really interesting moments, and again, we're just going to show you two, but there are, of course, many, many of these that are being studied. That southwest corner is a really interesting one because it's a place that the history that is embedded in the mission period overlaps with the history of the battle. And imagine a place where you can actually see those two things together and interpret them together. Also, not doing a recreation, but doing moments where the materiality and the character of the space is, of the architecture is expressed, and then actually building 21st century platforms, light on the ground so as not damaging any of the archaeology, but that would allow someone to occupy the space. This actually identifies the full height of what the mission was in this corner. And imagine being able to stand here and look down all the way to the river, and of course from La Soya, look back and see this moment. Along the west wall, there's a lot of history to tell. This is the place where we understand Travis's letter was written. Again, we're not talking about creating rooms or buildings or structures that make it hard to see the space, but we think there are compelling ways to interpret and engage people in really meaningful sort of dialogue about what happened there. So there's a lot of stories to tell. And if we're serious about making this a kind of a world-class heritage site, an outdoor museum that functions for school groups and gatherings and visitors, and also functions on the day-to-day life of this city and make sure that it functions for them, this is another place where we have really interesting challenges. But we think we found some ways that are flexible and active that enable both of these things to happen. So one of the ideas, of course, is that this site is always open to the public. It is free, there is no ticket that is required, and any of you can walk in anytime. But the other thing is that there's a lot of people who are arriving here have no idea where they're going and no idea what they're doing. And so is there a way to direct people to a set of entryways where they are given some kind of interpretation during museum hours when there's active interpretation going on the site? And so we ask a question about whether we could direct people to a set of these places where that transition in grade between the street and the lower level takes place. There's probably one primary one, and we think it's in the Crockett building. But there are multiple ones that could be opened and or not opened depending on the activity of the site. So on a very active day when there's many people coming or going, more than one could be open, and on quiet days, maybe there's only one. Now again, it's important for everyone to understand that that's not a place where you have to buy a ticket. Everybody can still come in there, but it is a way of organizing people's access to the site such that that interpretation can take place. And again, this is only during museum hours, between the hours of 10 and 5, when active interpretation, school groups, and other things are happening on the site, on the historic site. And of course, the rest of the plaza is unaffected by this. So how would we achieve that? Without building walls, without making it feel impenetrable? Well, we worked very hard to kind of fine-tune that to the different edges of the site. So the south is different than the north and the east and the west. And I'm going to walk through each of those for you. Along the south side, imagine that some of the planting that is so wonderful in the garden comes out across the plaza just south of the footprint. And that's a place where it's sort of one of these thresholds into the historic site. There's shade and there's seating. Those planting beds could have a fence no more than 4 feet in it, but you would see over it, of course, at all times. We're showing 4 different gateways here. Those would be operable. Again, they could be closed at times, and they would be open at any time before 10 and after 5. On the west edge of the footprint along the museum, that image you just showed, that would just be a glass rail or a sort of very permeable rail. Imagine that it's 42 inches high like you would have in any museum or at the edge of a stair. And so kids can still see through. And that would just be along that edge in front of the museum. Along the north, this is that view of Houston Street that you see again. Here's a place where that would be operable. At times it could be pulled across and people would be directed down to the Crockett or to one of the other entries, or it would be open. And again, it would be open at all times that the museum is not in operation. Along the Gibbs and to the north and around the Federal Building, a very similar condition, a continuous sidewalk at the elevation of the buildings and their floors today. And you see the slightly depressed area of the Mission footprint itself adjacent. And then in the garden along the edge, here we've already talked to you about the potential for that masonry wall to come down. And we think that here a fence could be pushed back into the planting so it's almost not seen. And again, like you've seen here, the gates are at each of the locations where there are pathways that connect from the garden to the surrounding streets. So most of your experience of the space will be like this. A site that you can walk through, that you can access from any of these places. It's only during that period of active interpretation that people would be asked to come to one of those specific moments of entry. We do think late at night, there's probably, much like they do now, an opportunity to put up a kind of a post and chain situation, which creates a little bit of a buffer around the buildings for security and safety. But again, make sure you understand that the whole rest of that space is open, and you can still, on the way home from dinner, stop by and have a photograph taken in front of the church. So that's what we think maybe is the way to think about the changes that are possible around the mission footprint itself. And now I want to talk about the plaza. So I'm going to focus on the area south of the footprint all the way to Commerce Street. Here we think those 5 steps include the idea of restoring and relocating the cenotaph as a ceremonial centerpiece, providing large areas for gathering and public expression, really enhancing connectivity throughout the city, activating the space so it doesn't close down at 5. So this is a place people want to be in the evening as well, and creating shade. So what might that look like? Well, we think that relocating the cenotaph here as this moment of entry and invitation to the historic site creates an opportunity not just to have it there, but to begin to interpret it as a piece of history. So we've been working with the team to think about how we can create seating and interpretation, a moment of reverence where one can pause, reflect, and really understand, because there is a bigger history of that monument than is clear and articulated in and of itself. We think at night it could be lit to be a great beacon within this space, again, always seen in relation to the church, but never really blocking the church. We think this plaza is an incredible opportunity for public engagement and gathering. It's 3.5 acres of shaded space, which is a kind of an unheard of opportunity. The idea of connectivity also is really important, and we're just going to show you one of the edges, but we think this is really exciting. Imagine that you're at that part of the Riverwalk that is now underneath the traffic circle where the Torch of Friendship is. Imagine that that traffic circle goes away and the traffic is directed to La Soya, and we'll talk about this in a minute in terms of traffic. Here you'd arrive at a moment on the Riverwalk where today you have no idea where you are, but you would be greeted with a kind of an invitation to step up out of the Riverwalk to the streets of the city as a kind of gateway entrance to this site of the Alamo and the district. We think it's important, if we have a set of stairs there bringing you up, to also have a pedestrian bridge. Think about the opportunities of a safe and comfortable pedestrian bridge to the south towards Market, making a connection to La Vita and to Hemisphere from this site that is really understandable and legible in a way it isn't today. So some of this requires changes to traffic in the city, and we've been working with Gene Dawson and his team to understand the implications, because we are proposing to close Alamo Street and to close Houston Street. One of the measures here, which is really quite interesting, is to think about making La Soya two-way. That's 3 lanes, 2 lanes south, 1 lane north. So one of the things that we think is really exciting about this opportunity is that to rebuild La Soya could be an opportunity to make it a kind of great pedestrian street, to actually rebuild the sidewalks and make it a place that people would be happy and proud to stroll up and down. We've understood the traffic counts at the intersection of Houston and Alamo, and we think those can be accommodated, and Gene's study helps us understand this. But we actually think there's something that this opportunity really does for the city, which is a benefit overall, which is to create a strong north-south clear connection, which doesn't exist today, from Broadway to the north, which is of course a growing and more animated area, and south to South Alamo, all the way through. Actually, the traffic studies suggest that some of the complexity of a couple of those intersections where there's multiple points, including at the Torch, could be simplified and made more efficient by simplifying the traffic to a normal four-way intersection with normal turns and a phase for pedestrians that allow them to cross. We've talked a lot about the history of the site, and of course, part of the cultural history of the site is the use of it as a site for the parades. And so we've been working very carefully with the team to understand how the parades work and how they might work within this framework. So we're really excited because what's come out of this is that there's not one solution, there's actually a flexible framework for multiple solutions. One of them might be to bring the parade route around 3rd and Bonham and behind the garden, north of the Menger, into the core of the site, and then to go to the south through what is Alamo now to Commerce Street and turn. Of course, we've designed all of this with, in light of the floats and the turning radiuses. But the idea of rebuilding La Soya got people thinking that actually that might be quite an interesting route. It's more direct, of course. And with the transformed connection between La Soya and the historic core, this kind of opportunity to pause and see into the site would be pretty compelling for the parade. We also have said it would be possible for the parade route to turn in to the site. Pause here. Imagine that is the moment for wreath laying in front of the church, and then turning down and coming past the cenotaph all the way to Commerce and out. Again, not a single solution, but a set of flexible ones that can be decided over time. And really last, it's about how this functions on a day-to-day basis. It shouldn't close down at night. The way we light it to help interpret that history for people who come at night and for making an active urban environment is critical. We want people to pour out of those restaurants and spend time here, to have cafes. And so we think that the way in which we light it and activate it so it returns something significant to this city is absolutely critical. And really, the grove of trees is so important to making this a coherent place that people want to spend time, to gather, to interact, and to engage. And so we end here with really going back to the sort of the phrases that we set out for ourselves as measures of success. And we want to open it up to a conversation really which understands the ideas that we've put out there, the questions that we've posed, because we recognize we haven't answered all of the questions. There are options, there are still things to be debated and discussed. But we think if we understand those and evaluate those against the principles and these big ideas, it gives us a framework for engaging with that conversation. Thank you.
Hi. Welcome, everybody. A little few moments to breathe. My name is Maurice McDermott. I'm President and CEO here at the Witte Museum and also a proud member of our Alamo Advisory Committee. We've been working together since 2014. So I just want to say a couple things. One, when we first got together, first gathered as a committee, we knew then that we were paving the way for a transformative plan that reimagined the Alamo in the heart of our city of San Antonio. We created a vision, guiding principles, themes, and goals, 8 pages of themes and goals that are foundational to these plans. And tonight is the time that we test the vision, guiding principles, and themes and goals with this very comprehensive and bold plan. We have, in fact, in front of us a bold plan, and I'm going to ask each one of you to weigh in on your ideas that, that you like, that you appreciate, that you need clarification, you're seeking clarification about, that you're worried about, you're concerned about. So each one of you has a time to really weigh into the specificity of what you see. Now these, again, this is the first time, the first plan, so we must, this is our charge representing San Antonio, is to make sure that we understand it and that we challenge it and that we, say our piece. There is one request, and I've talked to Councilman Trevino and Sue Ann Pemberton, my fellow tri-chairs, about this, and just with respect, I just want to make sure that the vision that we came up with, and we actually spent most of the time on the vision, if you remember that. So I'm just going to read it, just so we know that we're going to be testing on our vision as well, which is first, to engage local residents and visitors in ways to personally connect to the Alamo area experience. We have the public with us today. Welcome. We're so thrilled you're here tonight just to witness this. And so that engaged local residents is very key to what we're about. Tell the story of the Battle of the Alamo and the impact on the Republic of Texas, the city of San Antonio, the state of Texas, the United States, and the international community, which is why this is so bold and necessarily so. Include and interpret the diverse cultures that contributed to the story of the Alamo area through meaningful and memorable experiences for visitors. We know that this is a story of the entire city of San Antonio and beyond, certainly Texas. And tell the in-depth history of the Alamo area to the present day as a tribute to all who lived, fought, and died there. And that's the vision. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of name different folks, and you can tell us, this audience, where you are. So I guess I shall start over here, and I guess I will start with Marty. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and who you represent, and then tell us, and by the way, what we're doing because of the time frame, in the 3-minute time frame, we're not going to have a buzzer or anything, that we're all together as a committee, shoulder to shoulder, but if you could kind of keep your comments as brief as possible.
Is it on?
It is on.
Oh, sorry. All right, I'm Marty Arce with the National Park Service, and I'm here as the federal representative on the committee. I think, one of the reasons that I was included on the committee had to do with World Heritage. Of course, I manage the other missions that are in the World Heritage site. And so at that level, I think it's nothing in this impacts negatively on the World Heritage site. Need to remember that the World Heritage site is just what is now considered the Alamo, and all the plaza and everything all around there is within the buffer. So I think we need to stay clear on that. But so I don't think it impacts the World Heritage site negatively. I think as someone who has spent 30 years in interpretation and have done some interpretive planning myself, I like the flow. I like the way the visitor is considered in this. I think that the idea of lowering the grade slightly, the 16 to 18 inches, I think that and the trees, I think, is a really good way of delineating the site. I do like that. I like the idea of delineating the mission boundaries with whatever it is that you come up with. I've seen that work really well, where there's archaeological sites underneath. That can be good. Places I've seen it, I don't know that they get as hot as it does here with so much direct sun, so y'all can figure that out. But I like the way of delineating that. The removal of the buildings, I always hate to see historic buildings go away, but I think that in relation to the story that we're trying to tell is the Alamo story, they either need to totally go away, or remain. The idea of leaving a facade that's fake, I don't like that. The outlining, I don't like that. So either they're there or they're not. I love the idea of pulling a lot of activity down to, outside of the mission footprint. I think that that's great. I think it's wonderful to have an active place like that and to still have your heritage site. And I like how it's been approached as a heritage site. And I think that there's a lot of room in this plan to tell all the stories that we want to have told. I think that's important. It's not just focused on one thing.
Thank you.
Anything else? I'm just trying to think off the top of my head what else.
And the railings or the demarcation around the plaza.
I like the idea of the plantings. I thought that was good. And the railing on the side where the acequia is, that I'm good with. I just don't know about the railing over on this. I need to see how that would actually work and how that would look. I didn't really get that.
Thank you, Marty. Frank, if you could introduce yourself and then your comments.
Thank you,
please.
yes. My name is Frank Ruttenberg. I am, I think I've got it, yeah. And I was appointed to the committee as a representative for building owners, I guess businesses down in the area. Our family has been involved on the plaza for over 70 years with kind of continuous business operations in one form or another, and I guess that's why my involvement was considered significant. And it's been a part of kind of our family and we've been a part of the community down there for quite some period of time. First, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't do this, and I know we don't have a lot of time to speak, this committee has been one of the most remarkable committee processes that I've gone through. The people on this committee and the dedication that they have given to this project is second to none. And I want to take a moment to applaud every one of you for the hard work that you've put into this process. So thank you for everything you've done. This has not been it's not easy to balance all the different interests and concerns that are taking place. To the design team, I want to say thank you. I think you have been listening. You said at the very beginning, we had a long way to go from kind of an early iteration of this that we saw, and y'all did spend some time listening. I think there's been some vast improvements that have taken place since some of the early stage discussions that have gone on as it relates to the landscape in particular, I want to say, understanding how this impacts the visitor in that regard. And so for that, I want to tell you all thank you. This is a plan, and one of the things that I think we all understand, it is a work in process. This is not the beginning, and this is not the end of a process, it's the very beginning of a process. And so a lot of what we've seen here will undoubtedly, through the input from this committee and others, will go through some additional changes. And we certainly look forward, and I think I can speak for the committee to say, we all look forward to continuing to work with y'all to make this plan better and make the opportunity better as time goes on. As it relates to my role, my specific role, which is kind of dealing with building owners and businesses down there, I will say, this is a changed plan from what we've all seen before. And so this is a first impression that we're gaining right now. And I think I would be remiss if I tried to get out in front of that issue for the people that I represent as a constituent and try to represent, because there's so very many interests. And so I'm going to tell you all thank you for presenting this to us, and I plan to get back with y'all, as every member of the committee will, and we'll continue to work with y'all on the impact that this has across the board as it relates to businesses and to the buildings that are down there in the area. Obviously, at any redevelopment plan, there are places where this plan makes businesses better, and places where it has a more adverse impact. And the commitment of this committee was that the commitment this committee had was to be sensitive to all of those issues. And I know we'll work together over the next few months to address those impacts that may adversely affect other people and diminish those as much as possible and enhance everybody's opportunity to make this a wonderful, wonderful plaza and a wonderful people place. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize, because it's important, this is a heritage site, and it's the Alamo itself and the story is a fabulous, fabulous story. But for over 150 years or longer, this plaza has been a people place. And that is probably its most significant contribution to history. When you take a look at the span of time that it has impacted this city and the citizens of the city and the way we've used that plaza. So making certain we keep that context is extraordinarily important. And thank you all for keeping that in mind. Lastly, and to the extent that people talk about buildings coming down, I will say in the large picture, I think it's always better to not take down history, to try to kind of focus on a particular aspect of history. And so to the extent, I think I see my family members are here. I thank you all very much for kind of being considerate of that, and let's continue to be sensitive to those issues. I think we can all be creative, and this is the beginning of a very creative process. We can all be creative, and I think there are ways for us to all work together to achieve both of the purposes that we're looking for here. I don't think I have any more to say unless anybody has any questions.
Frank, thank you so much.
Certainly.
Davis? Phillips, and if you could get...
I gotta have my hands to talk.
Oh, okay.
My name is Davis Phillips, and I represent the tourism industry. And the first thing I'd like to say is that whether you're from London or anywhere else, you're welcome to be here, even if we disagree. A lot of what I see is really good, and I echo what you've already heard. Some points I think that we need to focus on. We talked about the access, the pedestrian access in and out of Alamo Plaza. Narrowing that funnel between 10 and 5 as the majority of the day is going to affect businesses up and down Houston Street and south on Alamo. That's really, really problematic, and that's my most nice, controlled way that I can say it. And we'll talk more as we continue to meet, but that's something that's going to make me jump up and down. Demolishing historic buildings, I think that's a fight we don't need to take on. I'll tell you that the committee never once recommended that. I've been a part of it since 2014. I think that we've got issues like moving the cenotaph, closing the streets, the transfer of Alamo Plaza from the city to the state so that they have unified ownership, and a final Alamo Museum plan that's going to please the committee and the donors that are going to fund it. Those are big challenges by itself without strapping on the fight to demolish buildings. So I think that's going to harm our project. We're trying to move it down the field, right? I really do not understand the need to demolish Frank's buildings. They're outside the footprint. The committee never called for that. The attractions that are inside his building are going to be relocated to the entertainment district. So since his family's owned that for 75 years, they're part of the history in this space too. It's an asset to them, and it's just wrong as an American and a Texan to take somebody's property when they don't have to. These are big picture topics, not just specifically with you guys. I think that LaSoya needs to seriously be looked at, because telling me that squash 2-lane can turn into 3 lanes and that's going to work is scary. I'll tell you, as somebody who drives it every single day and is there during the busy times of the year during spring break and July 4th, you can't move. And if it's now 2-way traffic, good luck for anybody exiting the Hyatt parking garage. Okay? The other concern I've got is deliveries. These are not things that can't be dealt with, okay? We all want this to happen. I'm pointing out the things we need to deal with to make this happen, okay? Don't misunderstand me. Deliveries are a concern for the businesses that are there. We've closed off Houston Street. We've closed off Crockett Street. Now we're talking about taking away everything you have but a sidewalk in LaSoya. I don't see how you're going to have room for 3 lanes plus delivery in LaSoya. So those are some issues you've got to think about. The bus tour companies, where are they going? That hasn't been talked about. And I know that, again, we're talking about the site plan, but my focus is on the tourism aspect, is that all of these companies are respected. And guys, we can have the right kind of experience at the Alamo without killing certain segments of the industry, okay? There's a way to do that. And the tour bus companies are an important part of our industry. It's not my money, but I'm just telling you, looking out for the industry. And I'm not sure where they are, because I had heard at one point it would be at the Friendship Torch, and now that's changed, it looks like. The last thing I would say is we've talked as a committee about more connectivity, and I don't think we should close off the connectivity from the Alamo Plaza to the river underneath that space that right now goes through the Hyatt. There's also a business there that needs to be taken care of, the beer garden, which is pretty successful. And I would urge people, just if it's not your business, don't be dismissive of the fact that it's feeding somebody's family, okay?
Thank you, Frank. Ramon Vasquez, please.
Ramon Vasquez with the American Indians in Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions. I also want to thank you for all the work that you've done to date. You really, I can truly say that you've listened, and I know that I've been a big thorn in y'all's side for a while, and so we'll continue to be so if things continue to move in other directions. But I like what I saw. You know, I did like what I see. I will tell you what some of the concerns that, some of the things that stuck out for me is going to be the grave sites. That's always going to be first and foremost in what I do, right? And I want to just be clear that on the slide you had Native American burials, okay? And it's true, that is what is there. But it was a Catholic cemetery. And they were Catholics, natives that were buried there. So I just kind of throw that out there as well, okay? Because we can't lose that as well, right? But we don't know if there was Native American traditional burial grounds yet. We'll find out with the archaeology, right? But the other thing too is not just Native Americans, okay? There's Canary Islanders buried there. There's the first Presidio soldiers buried there. And we have to be mindful of that. And not just that, Lieutenant Colonel Antonio Elosua is buried there. That was in the control of the Mexican armies in 1833 of Coahuila y Texas, is buried there at the Alamo. So I think we need to consider all these cultures that we have as well in terms of the burial grounds because they're significant. So I just want to, add that. I think in terms of the buildings themselves, I think you might be, I'm not for tearing down buildings, but I also do believe that understanding the history of what happened there and why it happened was a result of something else. And I believe that something else has a lot to do with the Alamo, okay? And that is struggles that happened in this community that were embedded in racism, discrimination, and prejudice, okay? And I don't think we need to just also remember the healing that we talked about that needs to be incorporated with this site.
Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon Skrabarsek, and I'm a member of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. And I, too, want to say thank you for all the work that you've done, and I am impressed. I think it's probably, I get a good feeling by looking at the grounds and a feeling of reverence. I have a sense of it being a memorial, and I like that. I do have a couple of concerns, and the biggest, two main concerns. One is clarification. I want to make sure that the plaza is open, and I wasn't sure I was getting that completely. So if you could elaborate on that at some point, I would like to spend more time with that because I do think we all want the plaza to remain open. The other issue that I had was on one of the slides that you had, and it has to do with the cenotaph and the location of the cenotaph in front of the Minger. One of the slides where you had all the this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. The cenotaph is located right where you say the Mexican soldiers were. And if you'll remember that the cenotaph is a tombstone. It's a headstone. It's like for your great-great-grandfather's tomb memorial, And so it's important. I don't think we want to put it right where the Mexican soldiers were. I think that sends the wrong message. But I do think overall, I think we're going down a good path. I want to make sure the plaza stays open, and I do have concerns about the cenotaph.
Thank you, Sharon. I guess Sharon, would you mind taking it over to this table, please? We're just going to kind of go that way. Thank you, Sharon. Aaron, do you want to start with Aaron? Oh, you have your own. Never mind. Thank you, JSAV, for being so fabulous. You have your own microphone. So. Aaron, if you could introduce yourself. Yes.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Erin Bowman, and I am here.
Aaron, forgive me, Aaron. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, on behalf of the General Land Office, and I became involved with this 20 years ago, chairing a capital campaign for the Alamo. This is a much bigger plan than we anticipated 20 years ago. But it's very gratifying to me to see how far you all have come with everything you've done. I personally like 99% of it. I think that it is very well done. There's been lots of thought put into it. We are now at a point that we can really focus on the few things that we don't agree on and come to some conclusion. There doesn't have to be any necessity involved because we all want the best for the Alamo. So I'm looking forward to working with the committee and having a result in July.
Thank you, Aaron. Maybe Forrest, just since you're both with the GLO. Go ahead, Forrest.
My name is Forrest Bias. I'm an Alamo Defender descendant. Delineating, recapturing the footprint of the Alamo compound, I think, is very, very, very important. People coming to the Alamo will know where they are now, finally. Dropping the grade, I think, helps do that because they come and they know they're in what I would consider sacred burial ground for several different people there. Indians, we have the Canary Islanders, like he said, Alamo defenders there, the Mexican troops that were defending their country on their side. Closing the streets, I think, is good, especially Alamo Street, because that travels right over the Alamo battlefield, and that's sacred ground to me. Delineating the west wall, I think, is important. The buildings coming down, I know, can be a problem. If there's some way, when I saw that the buildings were gone and we could delineate the west wall, I like that, but I also don't like the buildings going. So I think that's something we're going to be working out. Trees, more trees. I like the more trees thing. I like the shade. Quite a few more trees I see than the plaza and the compound currently has. Pedestrian friendly, I like the pedestrian friendly. I'm concerned about the traffic though when we reroute, and like everybody said with La Soya, if that can be worked out, that would be great. The cenotaph, if it is the tombstone, the grave, the tombstone goes at the head of the grave. It doesn't go in the middle of the grave. So I've always been for putting the cenotaph at the south gate. Right now it's a little bit further south and a little bit further east than I would like, but I think that's because of the Battle of Flowers parade and stuff that would happen where the cenotaph, which I would like, would be right outside the Lynette would be. So, but I think the devil's going to be in the details coming up that we're all going to work hard for, and I appreciate the work that the planners and everything have done to this point and all the hard work that's come into it. Thank you all.
Maria.
Hi, yes, Maria Nelson with Centro San Antonio. I am fairly new to this committee, a couple of months, but what I have noticed is that the design team has listened to us, and I definitely appreciate a lot of the opportunities for you guys to just hear us and listen to us over and over and over. I understand this is the planning stage, and I think we are keeping that in mind, and that this is the first draft, and that I am delighted in the amount of the grand ambition that we have in providing San Antonio's, the locals and the visitors, a world-class space and experience. And that is important to me. I also agree and think that the connectivity moving forward needs to continue being a priority as it's been in this draft, and the accessibility. So keeping people in mind and continuing that connection as we move forward.
Naomi. Hi, I'm Naomi Miller, and I'm an appointee from the General Land Office as well. And like Maria, I've been on this committee for a couple of months, and I'm really excited to see the progress that we've made tonight on this. The most exciting part for me as a lifelong San Antonian, I'm 41 years old. I've been visiting the Alamo for 41 years, and seeing the original footprint is really exciting for me. And the most exciting part was the lowering of the ground plane. And I think if we can address all of the issues that we've heard today and focus on the positive things about, I really feel personally we have one shot at this, and I want to be respectful of everyone's opinions, but also know that this is a great opportunity to really honor our Alamo. And I'm really excited about it being from San Antonio, and like I said, being a frequent visitor of the Alamo and seeing it in such a different way is really exciting for me. William, did you want to comment? Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Warren Wilkinson.
Warren.
I'm also with Centro. Maria's been on the committee longer than I have, and she's only been on it for a few months. So I'm a newbie. I think I agree with most of what the comments are. The pedestrian and vehicular traffic have challenges. I think they all have to be flushed out. A lot of the designs that are included in elements in this design and elements that are no longer in this design, I think, are a real plus. Moving forward, we look forward to the future meetings to flush out the details.
Sarah.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Sarah LaDueña. I'm with the Texas Historical Commission in Austin, but I'm a native San Antonian as well. And a lot of my comments have already been said, but I do have some concerns about lowering the grade. I can understand the reasoning for it from the interpretive angle, but once you lower the grade, you're kind of losing any buffer. I know you mentioned that, but I would just be careful with the archaeology, what is there, and we don't actually know how much is really intact and could be visibly interpreted. And also, as a preservationist, I obviously have concerns about demolishing the buildings across the plaza. I am in favor of closing Alamo Street, but I do think there are a lot of traffic issues that would need to be worked out.
Dave Krupinski.
Hi, Dave Krupinski with Visit San Antonio. Also relatively new to the committee, just a few months, and we're looking at this from a true visitor experience and what this means to the rest of the world after that they come in and enjoy what the Alamo project has become. First of all, I want to say thank you for all the hard work that you've done. I think it really is a great plan. And we have a visitor center right across the street, as many of you know, so we hear all of the wonderful comments and the not so wonderful comments. And the fact that trees are coming is a major, major deal to visitors, and for children that are with their parents that are not getting the true explanation of what this site really means and the vision that we're all working on to make sure that confluence is told to families. It's really critical that they have a peaceful setting. Relevance is important, in shade and comfort. So I commend you for the great work that you've done with that. Concern that we use the word world class, and I know we talked about that a little bit yesterday, and I still want to emphasize that as the site becomes world class, or better yet, the world designates us as world class, that we have to look at the security issues. And we talked a little bit about that in the past, but I know that there's one way in and there's one way out during museum hours, and while that's great in some cases, having alternative plans, just as long as those are being looked at, because world-class opportunity brings world-class challenges sometimes in the world we live in today. And if we're going to put all this money towards this, we want to make sure that it's a very safe and protected site as well. The other thing that we're also reiterating with Davis a little bit on the bus tours and the businesses, you know, also tied to in the tourism industry, we share some of those concerns. And then finally, just traffic queuing over the summer. You know, I think those are conversations we can dig into a little bit deeper, but those would be some concerns from our end.
I'm Amy Shaw with the Fiesta San Antonio Commission. I'm sitting in for Byron LaFleur, who was unable to be here this evening. As first drafts go, personal view is that this is an excellent first draft, especially the part about embracing the continuum of history and recognizing that there is a cultural archaeology associated with this part of the city. The Battle of Flowers Parade, 128 years. The Pilgrimage, 101 years. Flambeau Parade, 70 years. The Investiture, this hallowed ground, Army, Marine, Navy, Air Force Days at the Alamo that all occur during Fiesta. We're very grateful for the opportunity to weigh in, and that it appears that there have been a lot of thought put into kind of the cultural icons of San Antonio and how that plays in this site. And we'll be looking forward to weighing in as the process goes forward.
Thank you, Amy. I guess you all have over there. So Phil, do you want to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, want to grab the microphone? Phil Backey. Oh. No fighting over the microphone.
Thank you, Maurice, for hosting us tonight at the wonderful Witte Museum, home to a lot of us. Appreciate that. I thought the plan was very interesting. I like a lot of things about it. I too have a relative's name in the Cenotaph. Originally, I was adamantly opposed to relocating the Cenotaph, but I think it could be located in a place that brings more people to it and gives it an opportunity to be more appreciated in a more personal way. And if you carefully inspect it and look with your own eyes, you can clearly see that it needs to be refurbished and preserved for the next 100 years. That's apparent. I know Capini originally wanted to do it out of bronze, but money was scarce then too, so we settled for the next best thing. I think if we look at you know, the Alamo and think about it in terms of the Shrine of Liberty, and we look and really look at what liberty represents, which is freedom and the ability to assemble, which is what the plaza has represented historically. And I think it's truly what binds all of the different organizations and people who have a connection to the Alamo in one way or the other, or a struggle that got us to where we are today. It's liberty that's the common denominator. So I think we have to protect the openness of the plaza, and along with that, the traditions that we've formed there over the last 100+ years. And the parade route, to me, is a sacred cow, and I think we should continue to find a way to make this site work for one day a year for the Battle of Flowers Parade and all it represents in the local history and culture, and the way we come together as a community to celebrate Fiesta in the military and civilian communities. I just will also comment that I've learned a lot and come to really appreciate and respect some of the diverse backgrounds that are represented on this committee, and I just appreciate the ability to work with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And then I should note, right, Phil, Becky, you represent District 10, so if you could also tell the districts that you represent. I think this might be the council table right here, I believe. So go ahead, Bill.
All right, I'm Bill Brendel. I'm appointed from Council District 9, and I also am a general manager at the Crockett, manager with the Menger Hotel. So I work every day in the plaza area. I too want to thank the design team. Their process of hearing from our committee and then using that and the guiding principles and the result of this draft has been great to see how that came together. And I did write down that I don't think not one objection that they've heard from us has been discounted by them or ignored by them, all was addressed in their plan. So thank you for that. I've written a couple of notes while the presentation was being made. I think the plan is truly transformational for the area, and that will be good for visitors
and our city and our citizens. And knowing that it's transformational, it is going to require acceptance of change and compromise, and so we have to keep that in mind at all times. A couple other things I wrote down during the presentation. I think Eric said functionality is key for the area, and we don't want to impact the day-to-day life of the city by what we do there. That's some of the things that concern me: deliveries, tours, access, traffic. Those unfortunately are things we have to fight through and work through, but you know, the goal, the ultimate goal, I think, of making this a world-class tribute to the Alamo will work through this plan as we tweak the draft into whatever, draft 2, 3, 4, whatever we do.
Thank you, Bill. Rudy?
My name is Rudy Rodriguez. I represent Council District 4, Councilman Saldaña's district. Been on, first of all, born and raised here in San Antonio. We raised our family here, and I've been on the committee since 2014. Yes, to the tri-chairs, thank you for all the work that you've done, and I do want to congratulate the consulting team and tell you that I think that we're so much closer and so close to a final product. And I think that the second and third and fourth time that you see the plan, you begin to appreciate more and more elements of it. And to the audience, I'd like to also share with you that over the last 4 years, there's been 21 members of the committee that have worked diligently, and I can tell you through some very robust discussions that debated opinion. And what you see today really is a compromise that comes from the results of 4 years' worth of work. Some of us may have wanted to delineate all the walls. Some of us wanted to keep all of the buildings. But what you're seeing is a compromised approach, which I think is very, very important here. For some of us, the cenotaph is in a perfect place. For me, I think it makes a perfect marker to the entry to the experience. If you're coming off of Commerce going to the Alamo and you're greeted by the cenotaph, if there was ever a sign or a signal of reverence to be held, the cenotaph would do that for that entryway. Now, I do think that overall the plan is very strong and very good. I, though, would have some concern that we have not quite delineated the walls enough. I'd rather, in the areas where we can, create some vertical delineation of the walls. Now, doesn't necessarily have to be to the full height of what they were originally, but something that really shows a more, a sense of arrival, a sense of place, if you will. So delineating the walls, the perimeter walls, I think are important. Within that context, I'd like to see delineation of the front gate of the Alamo. I mean, for me to have my children walk through the front gate of the Alamo and truly arrive there, I think could be a very moving experience. So I think it has some tweaks. I think we have some more work to do. I applaud again the consulting team, but please, as citizens of San Antonio, recognize that all of this and what we will achieve going forward will be a compromise for the collective good of the Alamo. Thank you all very much.
George Cisneros.
On behalf of City Councilwoman Shirley Gonzalez, I extend congratulations to the design team and, most importantly, to the 3 co-chairs for bringing this important dialogue into the open so that we can proceed towards a plan. Each of us on this commission, I've only been here in recent months, but this experience has been a profound examination of conscience about who we are as a community. It is a continuing conversation that will go into the future and into the next generations as well. The physical forensic studies that were done by the design teams and the architects and the archaeologists, it really reveals that there's some emotional forensics that need to take place in the community as we examine issues of culture and examine issues of acquisition, military acquisition, how we get to resolve those crises. And I want to thank all of the members of this commission for that opportunity. The one concern I have is this constant conversation about the visitor experience, because the identity and the image of San Antonio is actually to be determined by the very people in this room, all of the audience, all of us, anybody with an interest. We should not be basing the visitor experience on what other people outside of this community anticipate is the Alamo. What the outside biases and the movies and all the things that have been out there, the movies that have given visitors from outside San Antonio a vision of what they wanted the Alamo to be. Oh, it's so small. Is that all there is? Those things should not be guiding us at this time. We should be actually dealing with identity itself. When I entered this commission, I was afraid that we were going to make a Manifest Destiny theme park. And it is though becoming more obvious that there's a true concern that there will be community reverence and resolution. You know, we've had a very interesting history. There's a lot of violence in there, and we haven't all resolved it. And as Mr. Davis said, it is un-American and anti-Texan to take away someone's property, unless they're Mexicans, right? And then it's all right to come in here with weapons and take our land away. So we have to resolve, Mr. Davis and I sitting around and figuring out how we can get along. Because at this point, I think we have ruffled each other's feathers in many, many ways. So thank you. You are the ones that determine San Antonio, not tourists. We are San Antonio.
Roger Perez. Roger.
Maurice, thank you. I'm Roger Perez. I'm the mayoral appointee to this particular committee. I think I have a little familiarity with this. In 1994, Nelson Wolf put me in charge. I was in Councilman Trevino's spot in District 1, and he said, with the Alamo, we can do better. And we created a team and a task force. I was actually with one person's father on this committee back then. We began to unearth a number of issues. It became a very challenging issue, a very emotional issue, but it was a great learning experience for San Antonio. It's appropriate that we sit at the Witte, that 20 years ago we had a wonderful place here at the Witte, but today we have a true gem at the Witte now, okay? Down the block in the 1990s, downtown on Houston Street, we had a children's museum because there were women like Maurice and so many others that decided in San Antonio we needed to have a children's museum. But then after we determined that we can do better, we now have one down the block that is a true gem. So with respect to the Alamo, I believe we can do better. And I think we're moving in the right direction. I too have some concerns about buildings and access and traffic, and those are the things we can work out. But this is a unique moment in time for the city of San Antonio. In '94, we had great ideas, but no resources. Today, we have state commitment, we have private commitment, we have the city commitment, we have resources. This is a time that if we continue to work together, that we can indeed achieve something great for our city. It is a World Heritage Site, and we need to realize the importance of that and the significance of that. It is just, you know, a unique opportunity for us. So to the tri-chairs, to the planning folks, the hardworking folks, I appreciate your good work. We look forward to working with you, continuing to move this process forward, and I think we're moving in a positive direction. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Assert.
Good evening, everyone. Jose Maria Gonzalez. I'm representing District 8. I work at the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber in San Antonio. First of all, thank you everyone for the work, the consulting team, everyone.
Jose, could you say it one more time?
Jose Maria Gonzalez. Jose Maria Gonzalez. So having said that, that is an ongoing process. I would say the two main things, besides everything that has been said, I think I would not add too much because all of us have said a lot, it would be that, of course, the plaza remains open for San Antonians and open for business. What we do every day at the chamber is support small business owners. So definitely a big input in whatever we do will be the business owners that not only around the plaza, but for example, as David was saying, down in Houston and everyone that gets affected to have their input. And the only thing that I would add besides that, I would like to see in maybe some of the other committee meetings that we have seen Lozoya and some of the traffic, I guess, challenges that we're thinking about. And I think if anyone could overcome that challenge, as Dave Dawson, is for us, for the committee to see some more detailed engineering plans about the street and some of the measurements, how could that be faced. So to add those detailed conversations, not only about what would happen in the plaza, but some plans of what is going to happen around the plaza, the streets, and some more things. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Patricia. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patricia Mejia, representative for District 3. First, I want to congratulate Maurice on the air condition. It definitely works.
Oh.
All joking aside, I've just been freezing.
I'm
already, so
sorry.
that's-
I should have traded with you.
I have been on the committee since 2014, so I can say I'm extremely appreciative of all of the commitment. I know the public only sees part of the conversation, a very small portion, but everybody who has been on this committee, I echo other people's words, are definitely very committed and engaged in some very robust, is one way to put it, dialogues. And so I agree, this is a compromise. This is several years of compromise. But I do need to thank the consultants. And I have said from the beginning through various emails and in comments that this is very important to me personally, as well as I'm sure many families in San Antonio. And this is a story of genealogy, and it's much larger than the concept of visitors. And visitor needs to be taken into consideration of who are the families that this story is about. And so I'm appreciative that you have taken that into consideration every phase of this, and that you are very delicate with the language that you are using. I'm very appreciative of that. A couple of concerns that I have in connection to that is just the word, the usage of legend. I think that as we define who legends are, because there's multiple stories, that we are considerate of that actually takes various angles and stories to be told. I too am not necessarily completely sure that the conversation around the rails or the fence, however we might describe it, is finished. I think there's some continued dialogue there, given that one of the most important guiding principles is that it continues to be a plaza for people in gathering. And I'm not sure that we've had enough of that conversation. But more than anything, a huge thank you. I think this is a wonderful step forward, and look forward to continued conversation.
Anthony.
Okay, my name is Anthony Edwards. I'm a trustee on the Witte board, and I also represent District 2. I want to take a shout out, if I could, just tell you that every person in this room really should see the Confluence of Culture exhibit here at the Witte, because what it does is creates a context for the whole issue about the Alamo, because it talks about the generations, the centuries leading up to that famous battle. So I would ask all of you to watch that film, because what it does, it brings a lot of things together. Now, she kind of stole my thunder when on the issue of the legends thing. I think legends, that word conveys we, they. And I think we have to be really careful that as we talk about the Battle of the Alamo, that we don't use words that have a way of importing to other folks that there are some who won, some who lost. And maybe those are the realities, but there are some other realities that make for example, social media puts San Antonio and Mexico aligned in microseconds. So we shouldn't do things, I think, that have a way of alienating people or making people feel that they have somewhat of a secondary purpose. Let me just quickly look at some of my notes. The Woolworth building, for me as an African American, that was symbolic of a facility that was the first place to move toward desegregating the lunch counter. And so I'm kind of torn there whether that should be torn down or not. The cenotaph, I've not really spent a lot of time really thinking about it, but I do think that there are lots of stories that are left kind of untold. I think that if we look at the cenotaph, we've got to make sure that there are some names that may need to get etched on that facility that have previously been left off, just because of how important it is for inclusion. And I did Google the word legend, and I just want to end it by saying, you know, the Boston Celtics were legendary, but there were also other teams in the NBA, so we can't just suggest that the Celtics were the premier team. There are lots of other important entities. So that's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Anthony. I thank all of the committee members. I think each of you have spoken, and really appreciate your time and your thoughts and your consideration. I have Councilman Trevino who will close the session, I suppose. Yes?
Thank you, Maurice, and thank you for helping for us to engage in a great conversation. I want to thank the advisory committee members for being here tonight, beginning of more conversations to be had. I want to thank the design team, Eric, Natasha, and John. Great work, great job. And of course, I want to thank the public for being out here tonight. We certainly appreciate your commitment to this important project and do want to hear from you. Remember that there's the comment cards are outside. Also, June 18th, we do start the public meetings, so we hope to see you at those public meetings. This group, a reminder that we'll see you again July 10th, 6 p.m., location to be determined. We look forward to many more of these conversations. This is an incredibly important project. I want to thank Gene Dawson for being here tonight, Doug McDonald also as well, and the great team over at the Alamo, all the great work that you guys do every single day. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We'll see you next time.
He was sending. I'm going to open it up by saying, I'm Charlotte Ann Lucas with Nowcast SA, and this is Ben Olivo with...
We're not ready to
Okay,
announce
that's
yet.
fine. This is my journalist friend, Ben Olivo. How's that?
That's fine, yeah.
And we had a couple quick questions on wrapping it up, but that was really an interesting presentation, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
How long total?
Probably no more than 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Because there's another gaggle waiting outside.
Thank you very much.
So much.
So
Thank
did you
so
get
much.
the images finally? Did they download?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes, and they were so beautiful. I mean, when we live streamed them, it was great. So
Sorry, explain to me what
okay.
are you from? Or you're
Okay.
from? Sorry.
Okay. So what we're going to do is Ben Olivo, my dear friend Ben Olivo.
Good to meet you.
He is a fabulous journalist, and he's going to be. We're just going to be asking you a few follow-up questions about this, just for about 5 minutes, and
Okay.
we are live.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll try my best.
All righty. So ready? So I'm Charlotte Ann Lucas with Nowcast SA, and I'm here with Ben Olivo, who is my journalist friend, and Eric, you're a designer who gave a terrific presentation today, and we had a couple of follow-up questions about this just terrific presentation that we saw today.
What is your reaction to the reaction that you received tonight? There were obviously some issues about the cenotaph and closing some streets, but what is your sort of initial reaction?
Well, so we know that this is one of the most complicated and most significant projects, certainly that we'll ever be involved in, but for the city, the passion we heard is no surprise. We have heard it every step of the way, and I think, so if the question is, was I surprised to hear these people speaking their actually deeply held beliefs? No, we wouldn't have expected anything different, and actually, this is why we're here. We're here to engage in a conversation because we have choices to make, right? This is not a done design. That's what Roberto said at the beginning. This is a process, and we need to hear what the community values. And I'm not sure who said it, but it's right. It's not just for the tourists, it's for the city. And so we need to hear what the city values so we can weigh those things as we begin to decide what to do to make it better than it is today.
So we heard some really broad strokes. We also heard you saying this is sort of a framework. And there were a couple of things, I think, having to do, I guess, with the buildings across the street.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some clarification. What you presented tonight, are you proposing demolishing buildings, or what exactly are y'all?
So what our goal tonight was to show you the opportunities and options. So we looked at one where you saw all of those buildings remaining, and one where you saw the Crockett remaining and the Woolworths and the Palace coming down. And the answer is this has to be a community conversation. We're doing research to understand the historic significance and the integrity of those as evaluated against the Secretary of Interior's standards. So there's a standard practice in place here. So we've always talked about this as an evidence-based design. How do we begin to get enough knowledge so we can make good choices? So this is one that isn't figured out yet. We want you to understand spatially and in terms of the stories that we can tell what's possible if we make one choice or another, but then we have to make the choice.
So it's not that they are coming down, it's this is how it would be if some came down, and this
Correct.
is how it would be if
Exactly.
others came down.
Right, and that's our goal. All of this is about visualizing, because abstractly, these are hard choices to make, right? You have to understand what's the impact. So we're trying to visualize and help you see what those impacts are, and therefore, again, make good decisions.
And about the cenotaph, because that was sort of one of the most contentious of this whole process, but why move it to the spot that you're proposing, which is basically in front of the Menger Hotel, right?
Yeah, so I want to be clear, and I probably should have said this, the exact location, I'm not sure we know exactly where it is. We think that for the clarity of the way in which the footprint functions as a piece of the history that's related to that 18th, 19th century period, and that the fact that the cenotaph is a 20th century element, to help clarify that distinction, it actually makes quite a bit of sense to move it. And we actually, a couple of the people on the committee said this, the idea that it is a bit of a welcome, a kind of a way of starting to introduce you to the site, set the tone, seeing that relief as you're walking to the north, we think that's powerful. Is it too close to the Menger? Maybe it is. Should it be a little closer to the north? Maybe it should. These are all the things that design will do. What we've said is it needs to be always seen in relation to the church, which if you could see in those drawings, it was. We also don't think it should be put in a place to block the church. So when you're coming up, you should see the church as well. So we're playing a kind of fine line on how to do that. Do we have it right? I'm sure we don't, but we'll work on it.
But in any event, you're not talking about moving it across town.
Right, so we know that there were earlier proposals which moved it way far away, and we don't think that's right. We think it has to be understood within the context of what it was representing, and it continues to represent.
I wanted to see if you could give us an idea of like sort of how y'all got to this plan, like how long it took, and what are the next steps after this in terms of, you know, what other opportunities will the public have to weigh in on this plan?
So there's a long history, right, as you know. So there's two answers to that. One is that there was a previous master plan, and we are working from the principles and the larger sort of themes that brought to fore. We as a team, this team with Natasha and John, so PGAV, Cultural Innovations, and Reed Hildebrand, has been involved since December. So we're quite new to this process, and so that's why it's taken us this amount of time to learn all that we need to learn, to engage with this committee, to understand their values, the vision and the principles come forward, and to a point where we were ready to start to put things out in front of people for discussion. So that's maybe, and I mean, you know, and as some people said, this process started in 1994 and 2014, so there's been stages. This process is organized around the overall interpretive plan. That we are rolling out through this set of public meetings. There's a set in June, there's a set in July. There may be another set in August, depending on how the conversation goes. With the goal that the feedback from the public is incorporated into the plan via deliberations of this group, the Citizens Advisory Committee. We will then be evolving this plan with the hope that by the end of the summer we have some kind of a resolution. That will then go to the City Council, not as the plan, but in relation to some of the big questions like the street closures and the management plan, the agreement between the city and the state.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your
I really
time.
enjoyed it.
Thanks. That's great. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining. Who do you write?
Are we still live?